The recently released 2020 European Islamophobia report states that Islamophobia in Europe is not only very much alive, but has actually worsened. The report highlights Islamophobia in key fields such as employment, education, media, and politics. It revealed that while instances of in-person Islamophobia fell due to lockdowns, they have drastically increased on social media platforms. Here are some of its other key findings. Joining us now to discuss this from Williamstown, Massachusetts, is the co-author of the report, Farid Hafez. He is also a visiting professor of international studies at Williams College. And in Boston is Jocelyne Cesari. She is a professor of religion and politics at the University of Birmingham and Georgetown University. A warm welcome to you both. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Farid, you have co-authored this report titled European Islamophobia in 2020, and you've found out the situation is worsening. Why is that?
Well, I mean, every year there is a trend that we can observe, and we've been doing this project now as an annual project since 2015. And one of the things that we have seen in 2020 was that institutionalized Islamophobia coming from the centrist governments is just reaching a tipping point. We don't have now the far right who is just claiming something, but we have the center that is implementing and not only co-opting the policy claims of the far right, but really like cracking down on common Muslims and the Muslim civil society, as we've seen in France and Austria and several other countries.
So, Jocelyn, which areas of life we see Islamophobia is taking its toll mostly?
I mean, again, to follow up on the result of the report, what's important here is that we should not think of Islamophobia as an act only of citizens aggressing Muslims. It's about what we call governmental discrimination. Mm-hmm. And the fact that states across Europe have increased control and repression of freedom of religion. It's about limiting and sometimes denying the rights of religious practice to Muslims in different areas, from dress code to places of worship. And indeed, this is very, very worrisome. It's related to what I have called the securitization of Islam. It's not only seeing Islamic groups attacking or threatening the security from outside of Europe. It's also seeing Islam as a religion, as a threat. And that's very, very scary to watch.
So, Farid, you mentioned the institutionalized Islamophobia. Could you expand on that? What are you trying to say here?
Sure. And I think what is at stake is even not only the freedom of religion, but even freedom of association, freedom of speech. So it's a variety of freedoms that is at stake. And to give you one example, after the murder of Samuel Paty in France, what happened was that the interior minister used this as an excuse basically to raid numerous mosques. And he publicly said that we did that not because we have something against them, but because we wanted to send a signal, right? So what does that mean? It means a misuse of the political position that they have. It means sending a message of distrust and also trying to intimidate organized Muslims. All of this talk about Islamo-leftism and against post-colonial studies, etc. I mean, it's sending a message to the critical folks, and it's sending a message to the organized Muslims, because every mosque that is raided, they will ask themselves, I mean, after my money is frozen, should I do that again, right? And it's really questioning the existence of Muslims, basically, as we've seen it in France, for instance.
So, Jocelyne, how much do you think the far right and populism has contributed to this perception, and what kind of a role, for example, French President Emmanuel Macron played in this deteriorating situation on Muslims?
I think this is also a trend we have seen growing in the last decade. This is not anymore a discourse from the extreme right. This is implemented at the center of legitimate elected government that are not right or left as such. It is beyond the ideological divide, right and left. It is clearly going through all the ideological landscape, and this is indeed a new development. It was already in the making 10 years ago, but I would say that the extreme right or populist movement are benefiting from this tide, but they are not creating it as such. It's deep down now associated with the fear of Islam, not only by lay citizens, but also put into policies by legitimate governments.
So, Farid, what should be done to reverse this situation?
Well, I mean, what I hope at least is that some people in the political landscape see that this is a threat to the internal cohesion of Europe. And I do not believe that the French example is the example that everybody should follow. And I also have some belief that there is a lot of critical mass out there that really questions what is going on in countries like Austria and France, for instance. But the question really is, do the political leaders, are they willing to take such a huge step and really change the paradigm of how Muslims are perceived in Europe and the future of Europe is perceived and the role of Muslims therein? That's the big question that we have.
Yeah, so Jocelyne, if we could leave aside the political leaders, are you hopeful about the younger generations who look to the world in a different perspective? Could they change things?
I mean, the young generation is also very divided. You can see across Europe a sort of attraction of extremist messages from populist movement, what's called the white male syndrome, and it's associated with class. The question of class and social mobility is key in understanding, what kind of youth is supporting or not Muslims or fighting against Islamophobia. That's one thing. The second thing is we are now being very fragile in the position of, fighting against Islamophobia because there are no Muslims or not so many Muslims as elected figure across Europe. I think one key factor to change the situation is when Muslims are in a critical mass, elected part of political institution, mainstream political institution, and we are far behind that in France, in Germany, in Austria, and so that's something that has to be addressed. How can we make Muslims more present? Because there is a middle class now of Muslims across Europe, but we are not seeing it, and that's an issue.
All right, Jocelyne, Farid, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.